Coach Drinkwitz, he'll give an opening statement, and then we'll open it up for questions.
Instead of Coach Drinkwitz answering the questions today, we're going to turn to our panel for this Halloween special. Welcome back in to the Tiger Kickoff Show presented by the Columbia Missourian. I am your host, Harrison Vapnek, also known as Coach Drinkwitz today, joined alongside the well-dressed beat writers of the Mizzou football team, Wendell Shepherd as Marcus from the Bear, Adam Ryerson fresh out of the ring as our boxer, then Tim Donahue over here, basketball official, Brandon Haynes.
Just rigging a couple.
Yeah, only rigging a couple games. Welcome into our Halloween special, guys. Looking good.
Yeah, thanks for having us. Feels good to be back.
Not quite style points, but I think this might top it.
I think it might.
It might be better.
It's pretty good. And as we mentioned, question answer. Instead of Coach Drinkwitz, the presser, answering it, we're all going to answer questions from you guys. We sent out the X's or tweets or whatever it's called earlier this week, and now answering the questions that you, the fans, gave to us. Guys, are we ready to answer our fan-based questions? A little Ask Us in our background there. Let's start with just from colleague Brett Sarver, fellow Mizzou writer covering the team, with the question of spookiest Mizzou sports moment. I guess this could be ever. This could be since we've been here. Brandon, you're the lifelong Mizzou fan. I'm going to start with you down there to mix it up. What is the spookiest Mizzou football moment that you can remember?
I think this actually goes back to last year against Auburn.
Oh, that was a good one.
That experience of obviously Harrison Mevis missing the game-winning kick and then the fumble out of the end zone. I mean, there's not much that you see as far as spooky goes, but kind of the turn of events, you had a chance to win the game twice. You throw it away, and just kind of the freakiness that came out of that game, and it kind of led throughout the season about one-score games and your inability to win. So I think for me, that's probably it.
Adam?
I'm going to keep it simple. I'm going to go last year as well to Kentucky. I mean, it was a year of pain for Mizzou fans, and that Will Norris rule, punt, whatever you want to call it, that was just pretty scary to watch. I think it was actually funny. One of my friend's dad predicted what was going to happen, and then he said they were going to get a stop at the end of the game and force a punt, but he didn't predict that ending. Yeah,
so I don't think anyone predicted that there was going to be a roughing the punter 30 yards downfield.
Yeah, no, it was kind of brutal. So definitely one of the worst ones in recent memory, and the rule changed and everything from that. So, yeah.
Wonder what he got.
Both of those are good answers. My original one was Auburn, but I think I'm going to have to go with maybe an older one from the 90s. There's a couple of names for it, like the flea kicker, the kick flip. Yeah. It was against Mizzou, against Nebraska. I want to say in 97. Nebraska was going for a game-winning drive, and the ball gets the receiver falls, gets kicked up in the air, and then another Nebraska guy catches it. It's a really unfortunate play, kind of like Mizzou K-State, their first touchdown, but worse.
Mine one is back to 2013, a season we've talked about a lot this year. The one regular season loss, South Carolina came here. Missouri led 17-0 into the fourth quarter, and South Carolina had a crazy comeback at the end. Missouri actually scored a touchdown first in overtime. South Carolina scored on 4th and goal, the 17-yard line, and then they kicked the field goal their next drive. Missouri missed a 21-yard field goal to tie it off the upright. The announcer call was oh yes, if you're South Carolina, to basically end Missouri's national championship hopes. They would have a chance to play for it if they had won that game and then beaten Auburn, but I'm thinking Mizzou fans still pretty scarred about a 17-0 lead to South Carolina. Let's go to the next one. Let's go to Kate Cassidy's Missourian colleague of you guys. Mizzou recruitment thoughts post Ryan Wingo. We kind of, at this time last week, thought that Ryan Wingo was coming to Columbia. Instead, he's going to Texas Longhorns. Still, obviously, a very good class. Yeah. Williams Winnowary is a Missouri Tiger, along with James Madison, I think Drinkwitz actually saw play this past weekend down in South Florida. What are your thoughts, to start with you, Wendell, on the recruiting class? We haven't talked a ton of recruiting on the show.
No.
That's true. It's not phenomenal, I don't think. Like with Texas and OU coming into the SEC next year, Mizzou's class ranks at 15th out of 16 teams right now, which is not great. And I mean, there's still some time left. Obviously, signing day is not for over another month or so. But I think you need to get a running back, and I definitely think some more defensive guys, because you're going to be losing a lot of guys there after this season.
Adam, what are your thoughts?
I think that while it's not the greatest, and like Wendell said, 15th in the conference isn't great, I think that this is a new era of college football, and the transfer portal is really where you can kind of tip your hat if you're Missouri. This is a very attractive program to come to if you're transferring from another college. You see players like Theo Weiss getting these opportunities as transfers. Even Cody Schrader, the leading rusher for Missouri, is a transfer from a Division II college. So I think that if you were really nervous about the recruiting class, don't be too afraid, because you're going to get more people and more people who can make plays and be an impact player on the team next year. So I wouldn't be too worried about it. I actually think they're in a pretty good spot considering what they're doing this year and what people are going to be looking for as transfers.
Because I think you bring up a great point with the transfer portal. It's I'm not saying it's eliminated the priority of recruiting, but you can rebuild your roster entirely in one offseason with the use of the portal now. Go get a receiver, go get a running back, go get defensive backs.
Yeah.
Instead of recruiting where you kind of have to pick and choose, who you're getting. I think it's less of a priority. I know you mentioned 15 out of 16 next year in the SEC, but usually the SEC teams are always at the top of recruiting. Alabama, LSU, Ole Miss, Auburn, always teams that are regularly in the top 10. Also Georgia, who's won 2 national championships, we'll talk about in a little bit. I think there's a good chance that they can move up in those rankings and also have a high recruiting in the portal in this offseason. Brandon, what do you got?
I think the same kind of thing, but one thing I do want to note is how it looks like Drinkwitz is taking a different approach, more as going for the guys at the top of the line. And maybe that's just because the top of the guys were from Missouri, but he kind of settled for less recruits and more star power. And while it didn't work out with Ryan Wingo, obviously you get Winery there as one of the top defensive prospects in the nation. So I think that's kind of the trend. Another thing to look at, kind of like what Adam said, the transfer portal, but also St. Louis guys. I mean, Drinkwitz has shown a decision and a commitment to getting those St. Louis guys or Kansas City guys that are maybe at other programs. So Joe Moore, obviously a St. Louis kid, came back to Mizzou as a transfer. Cody Schrader came from Truman to Mizzou. So I think those are situations where you could have in-state players looking at Mizzou as a program and joining them, which kind of helps and adds into that recruiting aspect.
Yeah, and I think Winery is, and he's a 5-star recruit. He's I think the number 3 total recruit on 3. You have one of him, like that's a possibly once in a lifetime player in terms of recruiting, especially on the defensive side. We see defensive linemen go at the top of the NFL draft all the time. Will Anderson was the 3rd pick in the NFL draft this past April. He was a super high recruit out of high school. Like, these guys can be game wreckers on the defensive line, and I think he could be a guy on Sundays in only a couple of years. Let's go to a question from Mizzou up next. The question is, does Mizzou get into the top 10 with a win, and what are the keys to victory? I think we're talking about the Georgia game this week, a game we will preview a lot of coming up on our show later this week. Do you think they get into the top 10 with a win? And then, let's walk through a process of how they can win that game.
I'm not sure quite how high they get, but if they beat the number 1 team in the country in their house, they're definitely going top 10. That's one of the best wins in college football throughout the entire season thus far. And I think to win that game, they're going to have to be pretty much perfect. I mean, Georgia has shown they're so much better than everyone else, even when they're off their A game. That's what happened last year. That was probably the worst game Georgia played all season, and they still did enough to beat Mizzou. So I think Mizzou's going to have to be really good, and I think the offense is going to have to be firing on all cylinders. Defense is going to have to play well too.
Adam, what do you got?
I think they're easily top 10. Like I said, I don't know how high that they would go. I think they could have a chance to get into that top 5, but I think that they are already top 10 if they had beaten LSU, because that's 3 ranked wins.
And still undefeated.
That's a resume for top 5 in itself. So I think that if they're able to pull this win off in Athens, definitely top 10, maybe even top 5.
Brandon, do you think they're a top 10 team with a win against the Dogs?
Yeah, consensus opinion here. I think they're top 10. I don't think they get as high as 5, but if they beat Georgia, I would say around the 7 to 8 range. They probably hop in, and they probably wait to see how Mizzou performs against Tennessee to move up any further, especially with the teams at the top who they're like staples of college football, and I just feel like it's going to be tough to unseat some of those teams. But as far as what they need to do to win against Georgia, it's win the turnover battle. That's the biggest thing. They need to make Georgia make mistakes that Georgia normally doesn't make. And if you do that, you can maybe control some of the momentum. And you also got to be able to run the ball, because if you get the lead, you've got to be able to control the clock, control the tempo. Especially in Georgia, you want to have the tempo on your side. So that's kind of the biggest things.
My answer is they're, I think, clearly a top 10 team with a win against Georgia. I think they could peak at like 6 with a win on Saturday in Athens. The keys to a win, if you look at Georgia's one loss in their last 42 games, and if you look at how they almost lost to Ohio State last year in the Peach Bowl, it's hitting explosives. Ohio State had a ton of deep balls to Marvin Harrison Jr. and Kate Stover and Emeka Ibuka before Harrison went down and kind of swung that game. And then Alabama in the SEC Championship, the game they actually won, ton of deep balls to Jameson Williams and John Mechie. Mizzou's going to need a lot of deep balls to Marquise Johnson, Luther Bird in the third, Theo Weiss, Mookie Cooper. If they can hit a lot of deep passes and, quick drives and, stack up those points, because you're going to probably need 35 points to beat Georgia, in the 30s, maybe even to the 40s, to pull off an upset like this. If they can hit a lot of big plays and keep Georgia on their toes the whole way, which Missouri didn't do last year. They had the one big run from Schrader, but couldn't really generate a ton of explosive plays. They would have a really good chance to beat the Dogs. Let's go to a question from David Campbell, my roommate. I think this was a very good question also. Who is one player you all think could break out in the final 4 games of this season? Wendell, we'll start with you.
This might not really be a true breakout candidate, but I'm going to say Tyron Hopper. Obviously, he was one of the best players on this Mizzou team last year, and I feel like he's been kind of quiet. He's been solid, but the defense has really started to turn around the last 2 games, and I think Tyron Hopper is going to be a big part of their continued success.
Adam, who's your breakout player?
I'll keep it on that side of the ball. I'm going to go Ennis Rakestraw. He's been banged up so far this year with a injury holding him out of a couple contests, limiting him in some. But when he's been on the field, he's been a difference maker for the Missouri defense. He was making constant big plays against LSU and was, in my opinion, one of the big reasons that they were able to hold their offense to a not as explosive factor as it was in the first half of the game. Now, we only saw him play 1 snap in that 4th quarter against LSU. I think that was a big reason why Missouri wasn't able to limit the LSU offense. So I think that if he's able to get on the field and stay healthy, I think that he's got a really good chance to bolster his draft stock and jump up into what people may consider one of the best cornerbacks in the SEC to round out the year.
And they're really going to need him in a big capacity in the last 4 games. You look at Georgia receivers, Ladd McConkey, Dom Lovett, Roseby Jackson, just a ton of great guys. Then you look at the week after against Tennessee, guys like Keaton and Squirrel White, and even Arkansas has good receivers. Florida has Ricky Pearsall, who scored a touchdown last year against the Tigers. They're going to need the best game from the secondary in these last 4 if they want to make a run at the SEC title. Brandon, who's your breakout player for the last 4 games?
I think there's probably 2 that I think could really have an impact. On the offensive line, specifically Armand Mimbu. I mean, we've kind of seen the highlight videos that have run across X, just about him trucking over players and just his ability to kind of be physical along that line. Mizzou's had more success running on his side with running the ball and everything, so I think he's a big key. Also, Harrison Mevis. He performed well against Georgia last year. I think knocked in 5 field goals during that game.
A couple from 50.
Yeah, exactly. So he's obviously a big key. He's had his struggles this year. I think he's a player that could really turn the season around for himself in these last couple games against big-time opponents in big-time moments and help his draft stock, especially, or undrafted draft stock.
Yeah, my big one is Brett Norfleet. I think we've been seeing him more and more involved in the offense. I think they've transitioned from less of Stevens more to Norfleet. We saw him have the touchdown, I believe, against LSU. Continues to rack up the snap count. Also on the defensive, I don't think this is like a breakout, but they're going to need the best football from Chris Abrams-Strain in these last 4 games. He's was a mid-season All-American. He's in the conversation for the Thorpe Award for the best defensive back in college football. I know it's like a soft answer for like breakout player, but like if he plays at the top of his level, which we know he's capable of, like these teams, Georgia, Florida, Tennessee, and the passing attacks that they have, it's going to go a long way for the Tigers. Let's go to Matthew Rose. It's kind of a 2-part question. What was the exemption for bowl games not counting toward the 4 games redshirt made permanent, and then also would Georgia, this game be the first time we can see that full roster? I don't really know much detail about the redshirt. Do you know?
I believe what it is you can play 4 regular season games plus a bowl game. So I think, honestly, it kind of depends on what happens against Georgia, because if you beat Georgia, you are looking at a SEC championship game plus maybe a bowl game or even more than that. So I would say after the Georgia game, we could probably see the full roster.
Adam, what do you think?
Well, I know that, I believe it was last week, either last presser or after the South Carolina game, Drinkwitz mentioned that 8 players had already passed that redshirt threshold, and he said that he wouldn't be surprised if there's 3-4 more guys that pass that threshold as well. So I think that in terms of the full roster, we've kind of already seen it, in my opinion. Sure, there's probably some guys that they want to get a little more involved, some younger guys, maybe in games where they're up a couple scores, something like that. But I mean, I think we've really seen this full roster and kind of what Missouri can do and what they're built like right now, especially in the last 3 game stretch. We've seen them really take a step up, and like guys like Marquise Johnson are continuously making an impact. So I think that we're getting a pretty good idea of what Missouri's like.
Brandon, what about a guy like Jamal Roberts? I think Drinkwitz mentioned in the presser that he wanted to play him against South Carolina, but didn't really have the opportunity. I don't really know much of that meant. Any chance we see him, because if he qualifies for that redshirt rule where he can still keep his eligibility for the year next year, despite playing snaps this year, do we think we might see him at all?
Yeah, I think Kirby Moore talked about it the other day at the press conference, just about Mizzou needing to find a true running back behind Cody Schrader. And regardless of however people see Nate Pete, obviously it's not getting done in practice and obviously on the field. So I just think a guy like Jamal could be somebody that steps up into that role. Now, I think it's important to preserve him, probably just because you got 2 graduate guys who are leaving. And while it'd be fine having him as a sophomore, to have that extra year of comfort for you at the running back position, especially when you don't have anybody coming in right now in the recruiting class to really replace that losing talent, they may target someone in the transfer portal, but I think it'll be important to kind of preserve that here throughout these next games, especially when Cody Schrader's been clicking the way he has been.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to take Schrader out when he's one of the leading rushers in the whole SEC. Our last question, we're going to go back over to Kate Cassidy. This is non-Mizzou football related, kind of more to us as journalists. Thought of another, what have you all learned as journalists now that we're halfway done with the season/semester? Favorite and least favorite moments? Wendell, what do you got? Kind of a deep question here.
Yeah, I would say one of the things I've kind of continually learned being a sports journalist is you can't be hesitant at all. I remember the very first press conference I went to in the spring, it was kind of like an open forum type thing, and like everyone was just jumps to ask questions really fast, and I was, I'm like not the most like super outgoing person. I was kind of hesitant to ask questions. I was like, okay, I got to like really jump on it. I think that's something that we've all, I think, have grown in that area. So I would say like probably biggest lesson, favorite moment or memory, I think it's probably when we were in Nashville.
Yeah.
For the Vandy game, and then like after the game, we immediately Drink drops a bat signal, and then we're like rushing to put together a story, and we're like in the car in like some random parking lot in Nashville writing a story. That was fun. Least favorite moment, I don't know that I really, maybe us not quite getting to the elevator in time for, I don't remember which game that was, and having to take 6 flights of stairs up.
Oh yeah.
Right before kickoff. Was that Kansas State?
That was K-State, I think.
Yeah.
So that was brutal.
That was a little nerve-wracking,
Yeah.
but we made it.
Adam, what do you got for this answer?
The one thing that I've learned is like all the sports journalists that I've been around, like they're some of the nicest people that I've met. Like they just love to talk, and they love to talk about sports, and I love to talk about sports. So I've really enjoyed all the connections that I've been able to make throughout this whole process, and meeting all the different kinds of people and getting their mindsets on life and stuff like that. Favorite moment so far, probably. I'm going to say Nashville, but I'm going to say it was when we were walking around and just like making fun of how trashy that stadium looked because all the construction.
The cranes behind the end zone.
It was crazy, and it's just something that I never thought I'd be able to see, but I will say that press box still is my favorite press box. Like that place was nice to be in. And then like the 2 macaws that we saw, like that was pretty cool. Yeah. Like there were just 2 macaws sitting on a construction fence while we were walking through, so it was cool to see that. Worst moment? I don't really know if there is one either, but like maybe like there's been stories that I really wanted to get done and then I just didn't get to hear back from a source or something like that. But you got to pivot. That's just part of the game. Yeah, you got to adjust. That's just part of the game. It's the second half adjustment. I don't know. So.
Brandon, what do you have?
I would say, as far as something I've learned, it centers a lot around sourcing and just being able to talk to family and stuff. For me, I think it's been cool to see how much family is willing to talk and how open they are and how excited they get kind of when they see those stories take place. Obviously, we delivered stories to Brady Cook's parents. Wendell delivered stories to Luke Bauer's parents. And it's just kind of cool to see how families are so open to speak with reporters, even though they've probably been doing it for years and years and years, and they probably get tired of speaking to reporters, but it's just cool that they offer that kind of insight and stories on that. As far as favorite moment, I will say while it sucked to not be a part of it, I think watching people storm the field for K-State.
It was fun to be part of that.
I forgot about that. Yeah.
It was just something cool to see from above and just kind of have like a bird's eye view of it and just the excitement that surrounded it. I don't really have a least favorite moment, I won't lie. It's just been
Everything has been great.
It's been a fun year.
I would say for me, real fast, I think that something I've learned is in terms of specifically producing the show is trying to balance what we like to do and also like kind of what the audience wants.
Right.
To try to find that like kind of connection of like, hey, what do we do well, but what do other people kind of want to see? Favorite moment, I think, was when we had the Louisiana food.
Yeah,
that was funny.
I think that was it might have been our most fun episode. Least favorite moment? I don't think we've had one, especially in terms of like this show specifically. Like, it's been kind of smooth sailing from the start. Like, we're more than halfway through the year, almost 2/3. Like, every show we've done, it's like we have great chemistry. Like, everything we've done has just been, in full sail. And we look forward to coming here every Monday and Wednesday afternoon. And it's still got ways to go though, and hopefully even further down the season. Let's like wrap up with a little trick or treat. Actually, trick and treat, I guess, in that matter. So our trick is going to be, what has surprised you on Missouri football this season? And then the treat is going to be a little bit of a look ahead. What do we think is sweet that's coming ahead for the Missouri football season coming up? What do you got?
My trick or thing that surprised me is just how explosive the offense has been this season. We knew that was, a goal with Kirby Moore coming in, but just seeing how good the offense has been, it's crazy looking through, like national leaderboards and seeing Brady Cook, Luther Burden, Cody Schrader, the entire Mizzou offense being near the top of those lists, or something that I'm kind of surprised was surprised by. I guess the treat, I'm looking forward to seeing how much this defense continues to grow. That's something we expected at the beginning of the season that we didn't get, but the last 2 games they've been really good, and I think if you take the offense plus the defense performing how they've been, this could be a really good team these last few weeks.
What are your trick and treat, Adam Ryerson?
For my trick, I think I'm going to go to the special teams. I wasn't, blown away by how they had been performing, but with that fake punt, the touchdown pass to Marquise Johnson from Luke Bauer, that was a nice little trick. It surprised me, and I think it really has projected Missouri to get to a good spot. And they've been able to capitalize since that play. And, they've just been dominant since it. So that was a little bit of a nice trick for me. The treat, I'll go to the offensive line. They've been really good. They haven't really had too many problems outside of penalties, which they've been reducing. At least last week, they only had 1 or 2, I believe. 1? Yeah.
1.
Yeah, so I think that unit has been really good, and they've been really fun to watch. And it's just cool to be able to watch a football team and watch a quarterback play with a clean pocket. It's just the football is so much better and so much more fun to watch. So,
Brandon, what do you got?
I think the trick for me is the one-score games. In particular, last year, Mizzou struggled in those, especially against conference opponents. They've been able to kind of change the tide here. They haven't had too many of them, but still the ability to win close games and kind of come back in those types of moments. As far as the treat, I think the fact that there's no quarterback controversy. I think that's probably a thing for all Missouri fans, but at the beginning of the season, we talked so much about who would be quarterbacking the Tigers at this point in time, and I think it's kind of nice to see that they have one clear direction, one clear quarterback at the moment.
My trick is, you kind of took mine with the quarterbacks, I would say the success of the offense. Like, last year was an offense that was so lackluster and really wouldn't wake up when they needed to. Think about the Georgia game, think about the Florida game, Tennessee, they fell asleep in the second half when that game was close. I think that I've been surprised of when they need to turn it on, they've been able to turn it on basically every game this year except for maybe the fourth quarter of LSU. But even with that, they scored a touchdown in the fourth quarter to retake the lead. So I think that's my trick. The treat is, I'm surprised none of you said this, College football playoff rankings come out Tuesday night, and it's not even going to be a surprise to see Missouri's name out there. It's going to be more about like where they're going to be. Yeah. Are they going to be in that 17 to 12 range? Could they be sniffing closer to the top 10 with a 7-1 record in the SEC? Like, that's a great treat by itself to see. The Tigers are really making some noise in the CFP rankings, and we'll talk about Georgia later this week. Like, a win against that could really put them in the national title hunt. Last question, the most pressing one of the day. What is your favorite Halloween candy? Is it fruit snacks, Wendell?
No, not fruit snacks. I'm a big candy guy. Sour Patch Kids, far and away my favorite.
Adam, favorite candy?
I think I'm going to have to go. When I was a kid, it was the family size. What were those? The jumbo-sized, the Crunch Bars. Those were always my go-to. I think now I've more switched to Kit Kats.
It's a good call.
So I think I'm more of a breaker though. I'm not one of those freaks that just takes a bite out of the corner.
No, I'm with you on
can't do
that.
that.
You have to kind of break them apart.
Can't
What do you
do
got?
that.
Favorite
Used to
candy?
be Reese's. I just like Hershey chocolate right now.
Okay, mine's Reese's. The Reese's cups, but also like the Bunch of Crunch. You get them in the
Okay.
movies. Like
Oh,
it's
yeah.
like the crunch that are like in like little like circles, and
Yeah.
Yeah,
I know what
one
you're
bite at
talking
a time. Those are great. We'll be back later this week on the Tiger Kickoff Show to preview Missouri and Georgia before we all head down to Athens for what could be a battle for the SEC East title. We'll all be in Athens. We'll talk about that later this week. Thank you for tuning in to the Tiger Kickoff Show. We'll see you next time.